makes her life, nope. Hello everybody, it's your girl Jay, and today I am here with my October wrap-up part 2 for 2020. I read a total of 11 books, so these are the last 6, so without further ado, let us get started. The first book I'm going to talk about is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I give this a 4 out of 5 stars. This book follows Addie LaRue, who feels like her time is running out. On the night of her wedding, she makes a deal with the devil and she changes her life drastically. She will live forever until she tires of her life on this earth and surrenders her soul. But the catch is that everyone she interacts with, whether it be her mother or father who have known her for her entire life, or the barista at the coffee shop, won't remember her. So she spends 300 years wandering the earth, feeling very lonely and neglected, until she meets a boy named Henry who ends up remembering her, and it's like the story of that. I actually really enjoyed this book. A lot of people either give it a 5 stars or a 1 star, and there's not really an in-between, but I gave it a 4 stars. The idea of being able to make a deal with a god or the devil is not new, but the way that this is executed was really well done in my opinion. The story is told in alternating timelines from 1714 to 2014, and I really liked seeing how Addie was when she was younger, and then being able to kind of jump back and forth and be able to see Addie as she grows older and wiser as her time on Earth continues. I also really liked how we got some chapters from Henry's point of view as well. I think that the way that V. Schwab wrote about his depression and his feelings was very well done. I was probably the most intrigued by Luke. I think he was just very interesting, and I do wish that we got more from him rather than just kind of little tidbits of his story. I kind of want like a spin-off of just, you know, him. I also think that the representation in this book was really well done. I believe that every character, or at least most of them, were queer in some way. I believe that Addie and Henry are both pan, which I really liked seeing on page. I also think that the relationships were so complex, not only between Henry and Addie, but Addie and Luke as well. I think that it was very interesting to see that power dynamic and the struggle between the two of them. Overall, I think it was a really beautiful book. I definitely recommend you guys check it out if you haven't read it already. It's really, really good. The next book I read was The Invisible Girl by Lisa Jewell. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars as well. This book follows Sapphire Maddox, who when she was 10 years old, something terrible happened to her which caused her to start harming herself. She is sent to a child psychologist named Roan, but she is discharged from his care abruptly before she feels she is ready for that release. Years after being released from his care, she goes missing and a local man is accused of kidnapping her. At the same time as her disappearance, a string of sexual assaults have begun in the neighborhood, which leaves everybody on edge, and it's kind of the story of those two things happening at once and how they're tied together. This story is told in 3 points of view, which I actually did really like all 3 of the points of views. We get Kate, who is Roan's wife. I honestly just felt really bad for her. Roan is kind of a very shitty husband, and she deserved way better than what he was giving her. Then we got the point of view of Owen, who is the local man who is being accused of Sapphire's kidnapping. I've seen a lot of people say that they feel bad for him because of like the way that his story is told is very depressing, but honestly he just kind of infuriated me because the decisions that he made were his own, and he could have changed his decisions, which would have made him a much more enjoyable character. And then we have Sapphire's point of view, which was definitely my favorite. It's told in the past, so it's kind of before she went missing. I liked trying to piece her story from the past together to try to figure out what was going on in the present. I did really enjoy how all the stories ended up coming together in the end. That's like one of my favorite tropes, is when everybody kind of converges at the end of the book and everything ties together really nicely. I don't know if that counts as a trope, but you know, I like it. This book is very easy to read. I flew through it in 2 days. It's very addictive and you don't want to put it down. I thought I had it all figured out halfway through the book, but I was wrong, which made the story so much better for me. So overall, I think it's a very fun read. I know some people didn't like this book, but I was on the side of really enjoying it. 4 out of 5 stars. The next book was by far my favorite of the month that I read. It is Where Dreams Descend by Janelle Angels. I'm not 100% sure how to say it. So this book follows Kalia, who who has been dancing in a magical nightclub for most of her life. It is owned by a man named Jack who claims to be protecting her. She ends up escaping from this dance club and decides that she wants nothing more than to be the star of her own show. She travels to a town called Glorian, which is having a competition in order to find the next headliner for the Conquering Circus. So with the help of her newfound assistant Aros, she has to work against the prejudice against her due to the fact that she's a woman trying to be a magician. As the competition grows riskier, everybody begins to point their fingers at Kalia for the disappearance of her competitors. Meanwhile, Kalia believes that Jack is actually behind these disappearances, and she needs to hide this fact from Darren DeMarco, who is a former stage magician and one of the judges of the competition, and it's like the story of that. I freaking love this book. I give it a 5 out of 5 stars. It's apparently like a mixture of The Phantom of the Opera and Moulin Rouge, which I can definitely see the comparisons, but I think it's very loosely interpreted. I adored this cast of characters and the story a lot more than I originally thought I was going to. The whole atmosphere of Glorian and the Hellfire House is just so magical and mysterious and so well done. I was drawn into the world instantly and I could not put the book down. I think I finished it in like 3 days, which it is a pretty hefty book, and I'm working, so I think that's pretty fast. I really loved Kalia as a main character. I think she was so confident and fierce. At times she was a little annoying and narcissistic and full of herself, but honestly I think we need more women who are confident and sure of themselves in this world, so I was here for her. I also really liked how a lot of the focus in this book was on the double standards between women and men. I think that it can draw a lot of parallels to the real world because, let's be serious, women are not given the credit they deserve. I think that it was very interesting to see how Kalia was the better magician and everybody still wanted her to prove herself because she was a woman. I really liked DeMarco. I think that he was a very interesting character. I really liked learning more about his backstory and why he had quit magic in the first place. I was also a big fan of Jack, which is not that surprising because I usually like the villain the most, but honestly at times I couldn't decide whether or not Jack was the villain or not. I'm definitely hoping that there's more of a focus on DeMarco and Jack in the second book rather than all of the focus being on Kalia. I'm also usually not the biggest fan of love triangles, but in this one I was so invested and I honestly don't know who I wanted Kalia to end up with. Both of them were very intriguing characters to me. I'm also a huge fan of enemies to lover trope, so the love triangle was a double enemies to lovers trope, so I was in love with it, honestly. My absolute favorite character though was Aros, who is Kalia's assistant. He is just such a ray of sunshine, little cinnamon roll, angel baby unicorn, and I want to protect him at all costs. He was just the highlight of the story for me. I just loved the friendship that Kalia and Aros gain during the story. I also really loved the girls in the circus that Kalia got to interact with. I am praying for spin-offs with them in it because I just loved their characters so much and I want to know more about their backstories as well. It honestly kind of gave me like Caraval vibes, which I am a huge fan of Caraval, so I really want the sequel. I don't know when it's coming out. I think 2021 or 2022, so it's a far way off, but I need it in my life. The next book I have is There Will Come a Darkness by Caddy Rose Poole. I ended up giving this a 3 out of 5 stars, which was super disappointing to me. This book follows the 7 prophets who, before disappearing, made their final prophecy that stated that the Age of Darkness was upon the world. They also foretold that the last prophet would be the key to stopping the Age of Darkness or the end of the world as everybody knows it. The book follows 5 teenagers who are somehow linked to this prophecy and they need to figure out how to stop the Age of Darkness before it's too late, and it's like the story of that. But like I said, I was very disappointed in this book because I really wanted to love it. I thought that I was going to be like the biggest fan of it. I think that the concept of this book was very interesting. I thought that it could have been executed a lot better though. It honestly just felt like nothing was happening, even though like the book is pretty hefty. It was pretty boring for most of it until the last couple of pages when the climax happened. There just seemed to be so many information dumps that I never felt like I could truly connect to the story or the characters because I was just being shoved information without any of the emotion being put into it. The story is told in 5 points of view, which were all interesting enough, but I only really cared about 3 out of the 5. Ephra, better known as the Pale Hand, is an assassin who uses her powers in order to kill those who have wronged the world in some way in order to save her dying sister LaRue. We barely got any information on LaRue, which was kind of a bummer because she was a very interesting character. I think that it was probably one of the downfalls of the book in my opinion because all we really knew about her was that she was dying. Jude and Anton were probably my favorite 2 characters. I loved them. Hassan was just there. Like, I did not care for his storyline at all. I was so disappointed in the villain of the story, the Hierophant. It just felt like there was such a build up to how evil and powerful the villain was, but then wasn't really that special in the end, and it just wasn't good in my opinion. I did end up reading the sequel, which I don't own a physical copy of, but I'll insert a picture here. It's As the Shadow Rises, and I liked this book so much better than the first book. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. It definitely improved from the first one. I really loved seeing the characters from the first book because I didn't really connect with them in the first book, but the second book, definitely I grew attachments to these characters. I love seeing everybody's relationships with each other grow even more. There's also a triple enemies to lovers in this, so if you've been on this channel for a long time, you know enemies to lovers is my favorite trope of all time, so triple that, I was here for it. Jude and Anton, 100% my favorite part of the story. I loved watching them grow closer as the story progressed. They are just so precious to me. Like I've said in this video, I love when storylines are separated and then come together in the end and everybody meets up and it all converges so nicely, so I was a big fan. I loved Ephra's point of view in this. I loved how LaRue also got more of a storyline this time around. I still don't care about Hassan. He's annoying. I was on the edge of my seat for the end of this book. I'm definitely looking forward to the next installment in this series. I'm not 100% sure if it is a trilogy or a series, but I can't wait for the next one. And then the final book that I read for this month was Deep Betrayal by Anne Greenwood Brown. I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. It is the second book in the Lies Beneath series, which follows like killer mermaids. This takes place a month after the first book. I wouldn't say I liked the first book, but I definitely liked it more than this one. I think I give the first book a 3 out of 5 stars. The idea of the killer mermaids hunting for humans' emotions was very interesting, but there was barely any of that in this book. The first book had a lot more of that. This book unfortunately was less about that and more about Lily complaining about Calder leaving her, or the fact that she's not a mermaid for 333 pages. So it just got very redundant very quickly. I also just don't like their relationship. I think it's very toxic and not healthy in any way. Lily is repeatedly told not to do things, so she obviously turns around and does the things that she is told not to do, which puts her in a lot of danger, and then she's confused about how she got in this situation, and it's like, bitch, you did what you were told not to do. It's not that hard to understand. If you're told not to go in the water, don't go in the water. I don't know. My favorite part of the first book was Maris and Pavati, who are the 2 killer mermaids, but they were barely in this book, so I just didn't really care that much, honestly. I'm going to end up finishing the series just because I already own the 3rd book, but I really don't have high hopes for it, so yeah, 2 out of 5 stars. I'm gonna end up unhauling the entire trilogy once I'm done it. Alright everybody, so that was part 2 of my October wrap-up. I will leave part 1 down below if you want to check out the first 5 books that I read out of the 11. Let me know down below if you have read any of these, what you thought of them, and I will see you all in my next video. Goodbye!